I don't think it's not on purpose that a lot of the officials don't want people to know the truth. So if you look at all the history that's taught in the schools, it's all the colonizer history. And they don't tell the full truth on the atrocities that they committed against Indigenous people to get them off their lands. So it's on purpose. Like I said, that what we read in history up in Canada, they say they get rid of the Indian problem, so they created the residential schools and murdered off a lot of our children to prevent them from reproducing and creating more Indigenous people because they were afraid of us. So they used genocide to wipe out most of the numbers of our people so we couldn't battle them. And it's still happening today, even though Canada talks about reconciliation. They're not making no efforts to reconcile the relationship because it's still lopsided and still one-sided, where they create all the regulations, they create all the court systems, they own all the policing. So they created RCMP to remove us from our lands and remove our children from our homes, to put them in residential school, and they're still using the RCMP now to criminalize Indigenous people on their lands and remove us from our lands just so they can exploit and use for their own benefit. In Canada, the reason why we see genocide for what it is because a lot of the municipalities that have developed and they build their towns are on Wet'suwet'en land, and when colonization first started, our ancestors tell stories of their cabins being burnt and from them being escorted off their land onto reservations so that we wouldn't be able to, so that they could take the land and act like it's theirs, even though we've never signed no treaties, we've never given up our land. They used force to try and take our land, and are still using force today to still try and take the land for resource extraction and for building their pipelines. They never ever got consent, and they used their own systems to benefit themselves. So for the last few years, people have seen through the media how the federal government is who controls the RCMP, and they're the only ones that could sanction and tell the RCMP to do what they're doing. And we've seen militarized police be used to remove Indigenous people off their lands, even though it's elders and women who are unarmed. They're facing the violence of the police, and a lot of them experience trauma. And even though they're throwing their trauma on our people, they're still not fearful. They're still standing up for their land, facing the trauma over and over again, because they see the value in the water, the value of the land, that you can't undo that once you destroy it. So they're saying they call it all out for Wet'suwet'en, those women, because we're matrilineal and our children follow us. We're concerned for our children and our grandchildren's future. That's why you see women that are fighting, and the ones that are facing the militarized police, because they're concerned for their children's future, and they're giving it everything they got to make sure that the water is still there for the children and the land is still there for the children to use when they grow up. And our ancestors did the same for us and taught us how to take care of the land, and now it's our responsibility to take care of the land for the next generations. Sue the government, but it takes money. And most people don't have that money to take the government to court to sue them, because it takes millions to go through the court system. And even if they said we went for title and rights, it would take us up to 3 years and the pipeline will be built. So that's why we didn't take the avenue of trying to take the government to court, then we didn't have the funds to spend millions to take them back to court. And they know that we spent millions to prove Delgamuukw Kastewa that the territory was never ceded or surrendered, yet it's ignored. They make the rules and to suit themselves, and they'll continue to keep doing what they're doing as long as they keep getting their bottom line and get their money there. They'll keep pursuing that until, like I said, the economy will collapse, because when it's such an imbalance like that, eventually it's going to collapse on itself. Canada even signed on because they're the ones that are subsidizing and giving subsidies to these oil and gas, and they're the one that signed that FIPA agreement to encourage foreign investors to invest in these oil and gas projects. So they're in full support of an industry that's the cause of the environmental damage and the cause of climate change, and they're not, I haven't heard any plans on any reductions to try and improve our situation, so I don't see them trying to make any change. It's all just lip service. I think the historical documents show the government saying that they had to take the Indian out of the child to get rid of the Indian problem, and our Indigenous people have been fighting since contact to protect their land, so that's why they created the residential school and commissioned the Catholic Church and many of the other churches in the other countries across Canada to remove children from their parents so that they can take culture and language away from them and make them become part of the general society, and teach them English and teach them how to farm and teach them all the different things. And so the government was the one that planned all this out, and they're the ones that hired the Catholic Church, so we knew they had this plan. And so 60 Scoop was another example of children being removed and put into non-native homes, and it's still happening today, where it's not as many as there used to be, but it's still, we have programs in our community where we have family support workers to work with the families to prevent the children from being removed. So it's still a tactic from the government to still remove children, but our communities are fighting back to try and keep children in their communities, keep children in their homes by running different programs and services. So I know our community has different entities like Anabib and other entities that are helping try to keep children in our communities.